was just kind of empty. But previously, there had been a church on this property. So when you are looking at the property owned by my family, there is a deep valley type area, and you can see for quite a ways back So, apparently, this ghost horse floated from the cemetery up to the graveyard on the hill, which, well, it's kind of spooky. They said that after the horse floated off to the graveyard, their horses seemed perfectly fine and took them right back to the house. So, after having been to this piece of land and at the house and the graveyard, I can tell you it is rather spooky and eerie of a place, but I personally have not seen anything there myself. Like I said, my great-great-grandfather and even my great-grandfather did not believe in ghosts, but they both swear that that is what my great-great-grandfather had seen that night, was the ghost of a horse. So, that is the first story for you guys. I will tell you guys the second ghost story that we have in our family. Now, this one happened to my grandpa. So, my grandpa is also from eastern Kentucky as well, and he lived in the same small town, even though he is not the son of my great-grandfather from the previous story. Anyways, my grandpa had quite a few brothers and sisters. I think he had 8 brothers and sisters. And so, my grandpa still lived at home with his parents, and he went to visit one of his older sisters. So, his older sister, my grandpa's older sister, she was married to a man, and they lived way up another creek. So, in order to get to their house, my grandpa had to walk quite a ways. It was like several miles away from his house and go up a creek bed for at least a mile. or anything like this. He was out in the country with no one around, basically. So he's walking back home, trying to be careful so as not to fall and not to get lost, when he's all of a sudden heard a blood-curdling scream come from the top of the hill he was next to. He stopped and paused for a moment, and my grandpa heard this blood-curdling scream again. He said that it sounded like a woman screaming. All of a sudden, he heard what sounded like a baby crying. At this point, my grandpa is pretty freaked out, but he also thought maybe someone needs help. He waited another minute. The crying baby stopped. Then he heard another scream, this time right behind him. My grandpa said at that point he ran the rest of the way home, and he swears that once he got to his house, his feet did not touch any of the stairs they had on their front porch. Once he got back to his house, he found the door was locked because his family thought he was most likely going to stay the night with his sister. He began pounding on the door until someone came and opened it up for him. When he got inside, he was very out of breath, and they asked him what happened. My grandpa said he had heard several screams, then a crying baby, then another scream right behind him. Then he felt something chasing after him in the woods the whole way home. Oh, and that's terrifying to me. Now, my grandpa does not believe in ghosts either, and he says that this could have possibly been a mountain lion, or a cougar as they're known. However, it was said that mountain lions did not live in Kentucky at this time, and had not lived there since around the time of the Civil War, if not earlier. So, who knows what he was being chased by, but it most likely was not a mountain lion. I hope you guys enjoyed those two stories that have been passed down in my family, and I personally don't know what to believe. My grandpa